Welcome, Wargamers. My name is Doug with 2+ Stuff, and today we're going to do something a little bit different as I ramp up to May 14th and 15th, I believe, the Vault Wars GT that's going to be in Springfield, Missouri. I recently did a live stream where I went through all the various lists of my opponents, or possible opponents, right? Just collated all the lists and then worked through them. Huge thank you to the team who's running Vault Wars. That was a really cool thing to put out that let me just chat about it. But when it came to my name, a few people had questions about my list, but I didn't want to spend a ton of time on it because there was so many names to work through, like some of the other players. So I thought, in a way of showing off my army and what I've been painting lately, as well as talking about a faction that I think sounds cool, I would do that. So we're going to be reviewing my list. This is my pre-event, what I'm hoping to achieve with it, and then I'm going to do another video after the event talking about this specific list and what I would do differently. And be showing off my models in the meantime. So I hope to have a lot of fun pictures of these guys getting shredded on the table, and we're just going to have a blast. I mean, to be honest, part of this whole thing is also just me going out of my way to prove you can go to an event with whatever the heck models you own and have a good time, because competitive or narrative, none of that stuff matters. We're all just a bunch of nerds who want to roll dice. And you can do that. So for all the folks who are going to this event to win and you're not worried about bone splitters, I'd be more curious if you were. Anyway, with that said, let's go check out the list. So here she is in all her glory, the entire army painted and are ready to roll. And here is the list behind it. We'll just rattle it off really quickly. It is Bone Splitters. The war clan is Icebone. So let's break down those things here. Bone Splitters means a few things. One, they have a once per game WA where in a certain phase you can announce the WA is going to happen, and all the Bone Splitters in my army get a 4-up ward instead of their normal 6-up. And that's pretty incredible if you know that your opponent really tries to deliver damage, say in the hero phase. You can do it then and blunt their magic power BS. If you know that they are combat focused, you can do that. Like, there's a lot of utility in a defensive type of WA. Now, I did mention there, and I kind of got ahead of myself, that it's a 4-up instead of a 6-up. Well, that's because Bone Splitters, because of their tattoos, naturally have a 6-up ward save. It is not dependent on being near a hero like the vampire stuff or Soulblight Gravelords, whatever. Nothing like that. This is just a straight up, everybody has a 6-up ward. They also have a very cool ability that before the game starts, half of your units, rounding up, are allowed to make a pre-game move of 5 inches. This is a phenomenal ability for board control because it allows you, now that we are in 3rd edition with slightly smaller game board sizes, I can project threat across the entire thing. I have a lot of pigs in this list. I am guaranteed a turn 1 charge if I want it. Just straight up, I can just do that. And it is pre-game, so there's ways to modify this, of course, but I can get on an objective even if my opponent takes the first turn. I'm still where I want to be. Now, the last thing when you're a Bone Splitter I think needs to be talked about is exploding 6s. You see, faction-wide, Bone Splitters faction, if you have a unit that is 5 or more models, when they roll a 6 to hit, it explodes and becomes 2 hits, which is quite good because really their main power is just throwing out buckets and buckets of dice. It's just a lot of attacks between the riders, the boars. Each of those bosses gets to have 6 swings. It does add up. Now, of course, for the bosses and stuff, it doesn't work because there's not 5 or more models in the unit. But you see what I'm saying of just like there's a lot of individual little paper cuts that are going to be throwing at the enemy. Well, that pairs nicely with Icebone, which is a sub-faction that makes the Boar Riders battle line, first of all, which is terrific. But more importantly, it has a special rule, and this one does not have a unit size caveat to it, but any 6s to wound just go straight through as mortal wounds, and it's the exact same amount of damage as the attack would be. So rolling a 6 on a 1 damage weapon will do 1 mortal wound. Rolling a 6 on a 2 damage weapon, like say the Rogue Idol's Stompy Feet, will transfer to 2 mortal wounds. You don't lose anything in the mix, but it's simply, the damage ends, boom, it goes straight through. And because it's on wounds instead of hits, I don't have to choose between the two abilities. I get exploding 6s to hit, and I get mortal wound 6s on the wound roll, which is pretty cool. It's come in clutch a few times. There's just, because this army doesn't have any rend, spoiler alert, it really just does not have much rend at all. Getting through tougher targets is really difficult. So at least, weight of dice is not typically the way you want to go in terms of like having the right tool for the right job and taking out an enemy. But in this case, it's kind of the only tool that I have, right? Just get a bunch of pigs on a big target and roll a bunch of 6s. That's my strategy. 6s do explode, 6s to do mortal wounds. Now, as far as my grand strategy, I went for hold the line because most of the units I have in my list are battle line. I can also, if I need to, just pull one of the 5-man pigs off because they don't do a whole lot of damage, but they're really good on the defense. So, yeah, I think I can do that. And my triumph, should I have the opportunity, is Indomitable. So let's start taking a look at some of the units in this faction. We're going to start with the spellcasters here. We have a Wergog Prophet and a Maniac Weird Knob. And we'll break those down one by one. So the Maniac Weird Knob, honestly, he is there to be able to keep pace with the other boars. Just having a hero that can project threat. I mean, he has cool spells with him. He can give him a +1 to wound spell. There are a bunch of cool things about him, but he's not like a great spellcaster per se. He's there to make sure that everyone's in command range, that the units aren't totally unsupported and by themselves, and if I need a hero to contest something or whatever, I have one that's more mobile, because everything else besides him is pretty slow. Like on foot, orcs are slow. His mount trait is Fasten, giving him an extra move, so he doesn't need to use one of my pre-game moves. He can just do it that first round or my first turn wherever I get to go. And his spell is Glowy Green Tusks. Now I'm going to give you a heads up. I am not looking to dominate the hero phase with spell casting. These are literally my only 2 casters, and they're okay at the best. So I decided to give them both the same spell because I just want one of them to be able to make it, and I thoroughly am sure I'm going to lose one of these heroes per game. Whether the Maniac overextends himself and gets himself killed, or the Wergog blows up by using his mask poorly. For the Wergog Prophet, his artifact, I gave him the only artifact in the army, and it is glowing tattoos. So here's the deal with the Wergog. If in case you haven't seen it online, people ranting about this, he has an ability that you can use once per game where he stares at an enemy unit. It just says enemy unit. It doesn't say specifically a model, nothing like that. He stares at it. You roll a die, and I believe it's on a 3-up. They take mortal wounds. But he can keep staring, and you do the same thing. And if you keep rolling high enough, basically the way it works is on a 1 or a 2, the Wergog Prophet takes damage. On anything higher than that, the enemy unit takes damage. You do get your save against these attacks. So, putting that all together, hypothetically, if I were to use the Wergog mask thing in a phase where I had my 4-up super ward save on, I could just keep staring at something almost into perpetuity, and I will grind things down. You will find super fun posts in the Orc War Clans things, people talking about all the units that they've killed with the Wergog Prophet stare, entire Lords of Change, massive units of dudes, just because the ability, the top ceiling of what he can do is so crazy. Now, conversely, I played a game where he just blew himself up. Just straight, I just rolled terrible. And there's just no way around that. That's life sometimes. But it was a really cool thing to be able to throw into the list, just to have. Like, he is just I think it's 12 inches is the stare range. Like, he has a bubble of, he can mess you up. And so that is a cool little trick to have in the back burner. Next up are 4, count them, 4 Savage Big Bosses. I used some guys on foot in the back just because I don't have enough. I don't want to paint a whole bunch of the exact same model, and also I wanted them to look distinct. So I have one of them is the actual Savage boss, one is the double-handed axe guy from the Underworld's Warband, and then I have 2 with different weapons, just normal orcs in the background standing in as Savage Big Bosses. Again, I don't have anyone else on foot, so they are literally the only characters walking around, these and the Prophet. So there's no room for confusion. But this guy up front here, the actual big boss, well, he is my general, and he has a fantastic command trait called Great Hunter. Great Hunter if you'll remember that move I talked about that allows you to go 5 inches after things are set up but before the first round, it makes it 8 inches instead. So it's kind of like the trick of their whole mobility thing is you get, say, boars that can move 12. Well, you give them a 8-inch head start, they can be anywhere. Round 1, they can just do that. Now, whether or not I want to be charging, that is completely dependent upon my opponent and all that kind of stuff, and the mission and when you start racking up points and things. But the option is there, and not every army has that option. One trick that's very interesting about these, and it caught my buddy off guard, you see, they have that same ability where once this hero attacks, another Bone Splitter's unit in 12 inches can then activate, and you can kind of mess with the sequence. However, most of the time when you see that rule, it is kind of keyworded behind certain things. For example, the Soulblight Gravelords have something very similar, but it's keyworded to, is it summonable or something like that? It's some unit limit. But that doesn't exist for these boys, which means, let's say I individually charge all 4 of these bosses into an enemy. One attacks, he triggers the next one. Well, he attacks, and he triggers the next one, and so on. And so all 4 of these guys will be able to trigger each other, and then, when that's done, I pick another unit, because the last guy gets to pass off that buff to somebody else as well. So with this, I can swing with 5 units before my opponent has a chance to do anything really back to me. Now, I say that, and of course there's a lot of things that have to go right for that to be meaningful. I totally understand, but also consider this. Each of these is a model. They're each a unit. The reason that that's important is because when you're talking about going against things like Stormcast with shooting that can drop into the table, being able to spread your units out with all of the mobility that I have, from extra movement to running and charging first round, all these kinds of crazy things, not running and charging, but either or, I can effectively zone out large, massive portions of the board. If you want to bring things in, you're going to be in a really weird position. Also, each of them counts as 2 when it comes to capping an objective. Like, these things really do matter. Now, if my opponent doesn't have, summoning or deep strike, whatever we want to call it that day, right? I'm just playing with someone against the board, say a Khorne list or something. There's a couple of Khorne players. These guys are going to act as a unit, with the caveat that I kind of want to keep the general one slightly safe just to make sure my opponent doesn't have an easy chance at getting the kill your general or kill your opponent's general thing. So that is it for all of the leaders. Quite an array there. Maxed them all out. I love that the Savage Big Bosses are 65 points. They are darn near disposable, right? And that's okay. And that's okay to be disposable in this kind of an army. If I just need some right pressure on a flank or something like that, even if I just hold 1 boss and 5 boars back on an objective, he lets them attack out of sequence. So together they make a pretty meaningful dent into most things. Next up here, I have 2 units of 5 Boar Boys. Now, these guys are terrific in terms of their defensive qualities, meaning, they're not going to do a ton of damage when they do prolonged combat. However, when they charge, because they all have spears, they get +1 to hit and wound for both their normal weapon and the pigs. The boars themselves get better on the charge. So you get this cool situation where, they can come in, dump a lot of dice, again, exploding 6s. If they are at full models, at 5 models, they are exploding 6s to hit, and then no matter what the size of the unit is, mortal wounds on 6s to wound. But it's 15 wounds at a 5-up save with a 6-up ward that is highly mobile and can go snag an objective. They're not a bad unit by any stretch. It's just, when you're looking at the Orc War Clan book, they kind of get outshone by a lot of things. And when you combine that all with a once per game 4-up ward, they get real nasty. They're obnoxious to chew through. One time I was playing against my buddy Rob here, and I threw 5 of these guys into a flank, and it just tied up half his army. I mean, because you just had to chew them. There's nothing else to do but to go through them. Also, if you're curious what the spell that my 2 spellcasters have, Glowy Green Tusks, does, it gives the boars -2 rend. It just, whatever the mount attacks are, gives it -2 rend, so it just really amplifies their damage, and I need rend because this list does not have much of it. Right beside them is a 10-man block. Now, I know it looks the exact same, but here's the thing about the 10-man block. This is a left punch when it comes to what my list can do. this is the kind of thing that if I know my opponent is looking to be reactionary, maybe play more defensively, these guys are going to surge forward and pin huge swaths of the opponent enemy. And sure, I'll take that punch back on the chin. I don't care. These guys are cheap and they're annoying to deal with. And then, you know, combined with how many attacks they get on the charge, the quality of them, exploding sixes, mortal wounds on sixes, all these crazy things, they're actually a very effective unit. They do combat much better in larger numbers, but they still retain the defensive qualities of a 5-man unit. It's just, I wanted to have a big brick for my opponent to have to chew through, and then smaller ones to cap objectives that, you know, you can't just easily delete. Now, mixing it up a bit, we have the, what do they call, the Savage Boar Boy Maniacs. This is the quote-unquote elite version of the infantry. And when I say elite, honestly, it's not really. Instead of having a 5-up save in 3 wounds, these guys have traded it in for a 6-up save, so it got worse, but they do more attacks. And so it really is just trading in that little bit of defense for whole hog offense. And so that is the idea behind these guys. Again, another big 10 brick, because this is the right hook, right? This is, when I put these guys someplace, they're almost just as hard to chew through as the other boar boys, especially if I can get like Mystic Shield or something very simple on them. They're a huge pain to deal with, and because of the amount of dice they can throw at something, again, with exploding sixes to hit, mortal wounds on a 6 to wound, they can just swing above their weight class, at least when they're charging. These guys with the glowy green tusks is truly, truly nasty. Next, we have the Big Stabas. It is 1 reinforced unit of them. And honestly, these guys exist for a simple reason. I need rend. That's it. They have, I believe, a 3-inch range on that weapon. It feels like it because they're incredibly annoying to try and pack to go anywhere with because that long spike arm. But they are quite good. And really, the idea is having... With Great Hunter, I can position them pretty well. I think for these guys... the main issue is going to be, where do I need rend the most, right? This and our next unit, if it's a big enough threat, I'm going to throw these guys, the Rogue Idol, and all of my Savage Big Bosses. That's literally everything in my army with rend. I'm going to throw it at them. Sadly, there's no way to make these guys battle lines, so you can't reinforce them twice. And because there is only 4 of them, they do not get exploding sixes. They do, however, still get mortal wounds on a wound roll of a 6, and at 2 damage each. That's still a good proposition. Also, these guys are surprisingly hardy, and by that I mean, by the time I get them into combat, typically, they're always part of like a second wave or something like that. Very reactionary. I like to have them kind of in my pocket. One of the things I've noticed in my last game is each one of these bases is 4 wounds. It's 2 orcs, 2 wounds apiece. It makes perfect sense, but there's just something about seeing that in action compared to pigs where they're 3 wounds each. They just get nasty. And then if you kill them as they're dying in melee, they do the final fling and they're hucking these huge spears out at the enemy. It's cool stuff. It's not as cool as it used to be perfectly honest. It used to be so awesome. I once took down Archaon with a whole bunch of these little dudes when I first had Bone Splitters back in the day because the final fling was poorly written and I abused every second of it, and it was awesome. But yeah, essentially that's kind of toned down, but I just need to have some application of rend on hand. And lastly, the main event, if you've been watching my custom Rogue Idol. This was actually made for me by user Verdian Forge. He's a fantastic person. I put it out there that I didn't like the base Rogue Idol when it came to just the model. I didn't feel like it was very representative of Bone Splitters particularly. And so I wanted something that was like a boar, because I have a boar themed list, and so many of the spells on the spell lore for the Bone Splitters are related to boars. The glowy green tusks, Curse of the Wereboar, for example. It's a theme of theirs. They like pigs. And you know what? I like pigs too. So we made this guy. It was a totally custom job. If and when he decides to put it up on sale like my mini factory, I will definitely be promoting it, and you will find it in the description of this video. Until then, just gaze and wonder. I love him so much. He is my rock Pumbaa. Pumbaa of Gork. And he is also another source of rend. He is a monster that I can sometimes use for certain tactics and things like that. Or not tactic. Yeah, battle tactics. Yeah, it's like if you take an enemy whatever point with a monster, you get extra because that's the theme we're in right now. And he is there to be a damage sponge, distraction, carnifex, rend on a stick, all these kinds of things. You know, it's one of those deals. I assume that my opponent is probably going to go for him first. When I think about the shooting Stormcast lists that I saw today, when I did that live stream, I really do think that he's gonna die like a lot, and that's cool because if you're not killing him, you're killing if you're killing him, you're not destroying all of the other things on objectives, right? And that's the real deal, is that I'm going to basically try to position the army to play solely for objectives and dare you to pull me off of them. And do it specifically in time. That's the biggest thing. This army will die, but can you do it in time for an event? We have 3-hour rounds, I think, at Vault Wars. And depending on how complicated my opponent's turn is and how much time they take, my stuff is pretty simple. It just rushes forward and it either hits or it doesn't, right? And that's kind of all it is. But if my opponent has something complicated and they can't reasonably pull me off of objectives, I win by default. And typically when I've played this army, I get very high on objective points very early, and then my opponent catches up. It just depends on how much you can catch up in a 3-hour game. And so let's put this all together here. We're here back at the main list. I call it the Underwall because I'm going for the Underdog Award. Putting it all together, I've talked about the versatility of the Savage Big Bosses. I call it the unit of them, but they're not a unit, of course. They're 4 individual bosses. But I'm either going to have them move as a unit, basically, or if I'm worried about someone deploying in my backline, scattershot them across the table and try to zone things out. The Wargog Prophet is awesome. He's going to be there hopefully trying to buff things out the nose. He does have a great spell. He actually really does have a cool spell of just the Fist of Gort coming down and punching everything in the face. So he's just going to be moving around the table. If he needs to use his stare, he totally can. It's not something I'm going to really worry about, though. The Big Stabbas and the Rogue Idol are there to be my big swing and hits. Rogue Idol obviously is very tanky. It'll take a commitment to get rid of him, and that's all I want, because I want you to have too many things to have to commit to get rid of, and that's his whole thing. That's kind of the thing of every single unit in this army, is just how many massive wads of wounds can you possibly throw your army into. And I think he's going to do great, as well as the Big Stabbas. The other big threats here are the 10-man units of Boar Boys and Maniacs, because they are massive walls. I mean, they truly are. I know I kind of belabor that point, but in most of the games that I've played, a lot of times it is using that mobility I have to capture objectives turn 1. Right? Well, even on my opponent's thing, I can just hold them. Well, why not? So I'll get the objectives early, but I don't necessarily want to charge round 1. It's okay to just stay outside of 3 and just be a speed bump, because now my opponent has to charge. And if they're going to charge 2 huge fat walls all at once, it gets real nasty. Now, of course, I don't necessarily want to do that. I actually have a lot of thoughts about putting the 5-man units up as the wall, because they'll get charged. And then when it goes back to my turn, then I can charge in, get my charge bonuses off. All of that depends on what my opponent is bringing and what they're doing. If I'm like standing across from Night Haunt, I don't care. They're not going to kill me, like straight up. I mean, they don't have a lot of killing power. They have cool magic, all these things. I like it, but they don't have the raw hacking through 159 wounds with a 6-up, possibly 4-up, ward save. That's a tall ask when it comes to some armies. So that's going to matter who I use as the wall and defense. And then everything else is kind of hold the center or whatever objectives are important based on the mission and respond, right? If Kragnos comes tearing through one of those units, well, that's where Pumbaa and the Big Stabbas are going to go. Let's go deal with that and just kind of be reactionary in that sense. Functionally, the list, if we're going to step back and take a look at it, is asking a question. Can you deal with this many wounds? If the answer is yes, you're going to win. There's no question about that. It's a pass-fail question. If the answer is no, I win, because I'm on the objectives before anyone could possibly else be, and I could just outgrind you, basically. The nice thing about lists like this, at least when I practice them with, because I kind of use the same strategy in Beast of Chaos and Magakin of Nurgle, even Stormcast to an extent, is just this idea of like, well, if I lose, I'm going to lose real fast, and then we can just go hang out and get a beer or something, which is a minor victory, even if it's a total loss. But like I said, I'm really just going to have fun, meet some great people. I want to hang out and see what the competitive side of things is like, because some of those lists we reviewed are brutal looking, but there are equally as many people just like me who are just there to have a good time. Their list, you can look at it and be like, that looks wonky. Then again, so does everything in the Bone Splitters section of the Orc War Clans Battletome. So, you know, I'm in good company. Massive thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, anyone who's a YouTube member, anything that all goes to supporting me and letting me do stuff like this. When I moved and went full time, I was super excited to do a whole bunch of events, and then lockdown happened and none of that materialized. So this really is like one of the first events outside of Holy Havoc that I'm having a chance to go stretch my legs and just get to see and hang out with people, and I couldn't be more excited. So I have only the people who support me to thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to be doing an after action report on this list to see how it goes, and I want to make sure something very, very clear here at the end. I totally net listed this. Okay, I'm not claiming any kind of inspiration at all. This is from an article on, I believe it's Plastic Crake is the name of the blog, and originally I was going to scrap that and then put Kragnos in it, but part of the thing with winning the Underdog Award at Vault Wars is no deity characters. It's called the Underdog Award, not the Crutch Award. So, where those heroes like Kragnos can really lift up armies like Gloomspite Kits and stuff. I'm going for hard mode, right? That's what the idea is. So none of that stuff. So I just decided to keep the list the way it was. I just wanted to make that very clear. I'm not claiming that I invented this. It's just that I've been learning it and testing it myself, and I've had a lot of fun. So anyway, friends, I hope you enjoy it. The shout out to everyone who helped me playtest this and also made the articles and stuff like that. Look forward to doing an after action report, and I'll catch you then. Happy wargaming.